Ukraine President Volodymyr Zelensky has urged Donald Trump to help secure ceasefire talks with Vladimir Putin. He says the West should impose sanctions if the Russian leader skips negotiations in Turkey. The Kremlin refused to say if Putin will travel there tomorrow after he proposed the meeting. Any talks between Russian and Ukrainian officials would be their first direct negotiation since the early months of Moscow's invasion in 2022. On Monday, U.S. President Trump, who is on a state visit to the Middle East, said he was thinking about attending. Zelensky said, "I don't know Trump's decision, but if he confirms, it would give impetus for Putin to go. Putin doesn't want the war to end." The Kremlin said it was preparing for negotiations, but would not say who it was sending. Spokesman Dmitry Peskov said, "The Russian side continues to prepare for the talks scheduled for Thursday. That is all we can say at this point. We do not intend to comment further at this time." Glancing nervously to the sky as yet another air raid siren wails, the locals on this bombed-out housing estate are praying the Blitz spirit will see them through their darkest hour. But these are not memories of wartime Britain recalled for the 80th anniversary of VE Day. This is life today in North Saltivka, in Kharkiv, the most bombed housing estate in Ukraine. It lies just a few miles from the border with Russia, and almost every tower block here has been shelled, leaving the bustling neighborhood a ghost town after thousands fled. But incredibly, some steely residents refuse to be driven from their homes, even though many have no windows or running water. And they remain convinced that, just like in wartime Britain 80 years ago, that determination will eventually see off their bitter enemy. AS diplomatic efforts to halt the war inched forward. No-nonsense pensioner Elena Weiser, 72, said, "This is my home, and no one is chasing me out of it." The estate, made up of scores of Soviet-era 9-story tower blocks, bore the brunt of Russia's invasion in February 2022 as Putin's shock troops launched a bombardment that killed more than 600 civilians. Around 700,000 of Kharkiv's population of 2 million fled, and President Volodymyr Zelensky later declared that a quarter of Ukraine's second city had been destroyed. As the sun toured the apocalyptic landscape of North Saltivka amid hopes that Ukraine and Russia could finally sit down for peace talks in Turkey tomorrow, it was clear that barely a single building had escaped damage. Cranes were tearing down buildings beyond repair, while the playgrounds were silent, most families with young children having long since left. Retired lab technician Elena was forced out of her home for 14 months after the invasion, but has now returned to her half-empty tower block, part of which teeters on the brink of collapse. She said, "They were bombing us with jets right from the start, and the Russian tanks were on the main road outside my home. My front doorstep was the front line. The house was shaking. A shell came through the roof of my next-door neighbor's apartment and destroyed it. My windows were blown out and my balcony was destroyed. Rescuers and fire engines did not come because the shelling was too intense. I didn't see my apartment again until April 2023. When I returned, I was so overjoyed, I walked around kissing everything. But I was also heartbroken because it was in a terrible state. Everything was damaged, and there were mice everywhere and rotting food in the fridge." Her houseplants, which she had lovingly tended for 15 years, were all dead, apart from an amaryllis which miraculously flowered again when she watered it. The worst of the shelling is over for now but has never fully stopped, and Elena still spends some nights sheltering in a corridor as Russian attack drones fly overhead, but she insists she will never leave. Kharkiv is Ukraine's most bombed major city, and North Saltivka its most blitzed neighbor. The Battle of Kharkiv raged for 3 months at the start of the war, with the city seen as a major target for Russia. As invading tank regiments bore down on the city, terrified Lyubov Bobro and her 3 children found themselves on the wrong side of the front line. And, in a bizarre twist, to make it to a safe area they had to evacuate into Russia. They ended up in a city 1,200 miles to the east where officials pressured them into registering as Russian citizens and taking local passports. Brave Lyubov refused and managed to flee back to Ukraine with the help of Bring Back Kids, a humanitarian organization launched by President Zelensky to secure the return of children snatched by Russia. When they got back to Kharkiv, they found their home had been destroyed by a phosphorus bomb, just one more war crime in a long list committed by Russia. They now live in another house nearby, which has plastic sheeting where the windows used to be and no running water or mains gas. A week ago, they once again had to run to the shelter in the basement when Russia attacked. When they emerged, they found that the blast from a nearby attack had ripped off the plaster from the walls of the stairwell. Single mom Lyubov, 40, is unable to work because she does not want to leave traumatized kids Alya, 15, Denis, 10, and Tatiana, 7, alone. Instead, she survives on a government handout of £45 a week. She said, "I lost so much weight because of all the stress. I used to think Russia were our brothers." When we got back to Ukraine, the children were crying tears of joy. At the bus station in Kyiv, people were asking why we were going back to Kharkiv because it was so dangerous. I told them, "This is our home." When we came back, everything was broken. Our house was completely destroyed. The children were shocked and said, "Mom, where are we going to live?" A neighbor allowed us to stay in an empty house, and it has no water, just a well. But this is our home. We will live here, and we will die here. This is where we live. Nowhere else is home, only here. So, whatever happens, we will never leave. Pharmacy worker Alina Kusko, 63, who was driven out of North Saltivka when her apartment block was hit, also hailed Kharkiv's blitz spirit. She said, "People have a great spirit around here. They want to stay because they are connected to this area. This is their home. My house was on the 7th floor. The roof and the top 2 floors were badly damaged, so every time it rained, water came into my home, and I had to move out." Although the locals insist that Ukraine will never be defeated, they are exhausted after 3 years of war and are now praying for a ceasefire. But they have little faith that Putin will stick to one and can never forgive Russia for the invasion. Alina added, "I am hoping for a short-term peace agreement, as that will at least be something, but I don't think war will end anytime soon." Lyubov said, "I hope that peace will come and the guns will fall silent. We are praying to God that they can find a common language to end this war. But everything Putin says is just talk. I fear that this cannot be resolved, and the people will keep suffering." And Elena said, "My opinion of Russia has changed 180 degrees. I used to think they were our brothers, but not now. How can we ever forgive them? But we always have hope for peace. This war must end." North Saltivka was one of the first areas in Ukraine hit when Russia launched its full-scale invasion on February 24, 2022.